Hello and welcome. I'm Rick Roller, and I'll be your game show host this evening as we discuss some Utah law some Utah law questions for the real estate sales exam. Okay, and it also applies to brokers as well. But as you probably know, if you're studying real estate, particularly if you're studying it in preparation to getting licensed in the state that you're in, most states have two different sections for the test. They have a section on national law, and then they have which is pretty much the same in all states, and then they have a section on their own state laws. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about some items that affect Utah licensing. And so if you are in another state or you're practicing or you're studying to take the real estate exam in a state other than Utah, um, you might want to tune into one of our national topics and you'll get more out of that because the Utah law topics will not be on a test if you're testing for California or Nevada or Arizona or wherever that might be. So take one of our other national programs, and they're all pretty well identified. But tonight we're going to be going through some Utah law topics, and I really compliment you for being here. Why? Because as this session is being recorded in November of 2024, there's a lot of things happening in our market right now. Of course, we have a lot of things happening because of the national election, the national presidential election, and whatnot. But there's a lot of things happening in the economy and everything else. Now, when I started over 45 years ago, back in the very late 70s, into real estate, it was a very similar time. We were going through a recession. In fact, my parents sold their house in Loveland, Colorado. I was first licensed in Colorado, although I was in Western Colorado. But they sold their house that they had bought in Loveland, Colorado, that they'd lived in that house for about 6 years, and then they sold it because had a job transfer. He worked for the federal government. My parents' dad. But anyway, they sold it for exactly what they paid for it. In other words, there was no appreciation. Now they had some uh, principal reduction, of course, because every time you turn in a payment. In fact, we had a long discussion, my stepdad and I, about should I go on a 15-year loan or a 30-year loan? Well, he could have afforded a 15-year loan. He was making good money. He had a high level position in the government. But he opted to go for a 30-year loan. So, had he done a 15-year loan, it would have been paid down significantly, even though the house didn't go up. So, you know, sometimes as an agent, you think you're doing good service and you recommend, well, I recommend you do a 15-year loan. He didn't, he did a 30. That's fine. It's his choice. But the payoff on his home, the principal reduction was minuscule over what it could have been if he had done a 15-year loan. Well, that's, come and goes. He had plenty of money anyway. So it really doesn't matter that much to him. But when people are asking you for advice, be very careful of what advice you're giving them. Just because you got a 30-year loan because you're trying to keep your payments down doesn't mean that would be the best for them. Or you just put down minimum down when, they have plenty of money to put down. Maybe they could put down 30, 40, 50%, or maybe just pay cash. People's situations vary. And so what I'm suggesting you do as you get into this time in real estate, there's going to be lots of situations. We're going to have some distress sales. There's no question about that. A lot of people have over leveraged. And in some areas, the market's actually not growing, it's actually receding. In some areas, prices are going up still, but it depends on where you're living. But here in Utah, we're actually seeing a kind of a stagnant price, but our inventory is building. And buyer's market, seller's market, it really doesn't matter. It's always a realtor's market, okay? And we just take our percentage off the top. There's just a lot of stuff going on. But I compliment you for getting a license right now and getting into business. As things progress, or you might say as we go along in time, and maybe the market slows down a little bit, that's when they really need a good agent. They really need a good agent. In fact, the highest form of salesmanship is nothing but service. The highest form of salesmanship is nothing but service. If you're service oriented, we welcome you to the business. If you're in it all just for yourself, well, they'll pick that up out of you and they'll go somewhere else. But they're also looking for hard-hitting, educated professionals because, in a slowing market, if they have to sell, if they're divorcing or if they've got a job transfer or they bursting their home out of the seams because they just had triplets or twins or whatever, and they need more room. They need someone that's a hard-hitting, hardworking, knowledgeable agent. They don't list with a part-timer usually. They list with someone that's full-time, someone that knows what they're doing. So I compliment you if that's you. Now, if you're going to start full-time, keep that in mind and give great service. Remember, good salesmanship is all about what? Service. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about some Utah law topics. Let's look at the first question. Running the technical side of this program tonight is our school owner. This is on behalf of the Institute of Real Estate Education, the finest school in Utah. Okay, here's our first question. How long must a brokerage keep records of real estate transaction? Now remember, this is Utah law oriented. Is it 5 years from the date of transaction, 3 years from the date of transaction closes, okay? 3 years from the date of transaction closes, plus the rest of the year that transaction took place, or the same thing, 5 years after it closes, plus the rest of the year that transaction took place. Now, this is a question you're definitely going to see. I mean, I know it's kind of nitpicky, and you might think, well, if I really want to know, I'll look it up. Well, that's okay, except you need to pass the exam with a good solid C minus. Okay, so knowing that A is the correct answer, 5 years from the date of the transaction closes, is a really good thing to know. So how long must a brokerage keep records of a real estate transaction? Well, I got to keep those records for 3 years, right? Which is C. I fooled you. It's not 5. It's not 5. It's 3. From the date the transaction closes, plus the rest of the year that the transaction took place. Okay. So,
welcome. We're so glad to see you. We want to
next
help as
question,
many people as
please.
possible to get started in their real estate career. If you like what you see in these videos, be sure to show our instructors that you appreciate them by giving them a like. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss a single one of our topics, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Guess what? We have helped more students successfully start their real estate career than any other school that we have stats for. If you want to get in on that action, go to the description, click on the Prep My Exam link. We have audio reviews, we have thousands of practice questions, we've got an exam simulator, and we've got a little secret surprise that might be your golden ticket to starting your real estate career right. So go ahead and click the link, and we'll see you there.
When a brokerage closes, what must they do to comply with the division's requirement to keep records for 3 years? Now, this is a brokerage closing down, okay? Is it A, they must notify a division where the records will be kept within 10 days? B, they must deliver the records to another active broker? C, they must deliver the records directly to the division. Like, they're going to store all those? Forget about it. D, if the brokerage closes, they no longer need to keep records of any transactions. I mean, all these people that, the tax time rolls around, they can't find your settlement statements, so they're calling you, I need a copy of those settlement statements, which that happens a lot, believe it or not. But the correct answer to this one, guys, is, drum roll, they must notify the divisions where the records will be kept within what? 10 days. Okay? Actually, that was number 1. Which one do you have that down there? Oh, that shuts down and closes. Okay. All righty. Number 3. What is a principal broker required to keep in the transaction files? Referrals, signed agency disclosures, signed thank you cards. Give me a break. A list of agents in the company. What do you think, guys? We have several. We have a number of people watching. What do you guys think? Survey says. Let's see it, Dan. Signed agency disclosures. Now, what about keeping records on clients? Well, do you think that referrals come from clients? So you sold someone's house, did a great job, and they're calling you and say, well, my dad needs to sell one of his rentals. Uh, it's in your personal business records for business planning, you want to know where your leads came from, because that's where you want to spend your money. I mean, if you're getting leads from a certain neighborhood because you're very active in that neighborhood, maybe you need to spend more time in that neighborhood. If you're working for sale by owners, or you're working expired listings and that's where you're getting most of your business or a lot of business, you might want to put more effort there. So yes, keep track of every check, where it came from. Was it a referral or whatnot? Okay. Um, but the division doesn't care about your business practices as long as they're ethical and within the rules and laws. The things you must keep as a principal broker is any documents that everybody signed, because they want to come in and look at your situation and see uh, what's happening there. Dan, your questions are varying a little bit of the ones you actually sent me, so we're going to have to work through that. So let's look at the next question now. Okay. Yeah, these are different, Dan. That's okay. We'll roll with these. If a closing takes place at the title company, who's responsible to ensure that the settlement statement is correct? Okay, this is a responsibility that's put onto the broker. The broker is the one that's going to be ultimately responsible if there were some mathematical errors and there needs to be some shifting done. The problem is that most brokers don't examine the settlement statements till after the closing. But a lot of brokers, prefer to examine them prior to the closing so they can make sure they were accurate. Now, the title companies are very professional, and generally they're the ones that are putting these statements together. And they don't make mistakes because, they have some responsibilities if they make mistakes as well. Now, their responsibilities is to the insurance department, and our responsibility as licensed agents is to the real estate division. But both of those are arms of Utah state government. And so who's responsible? Well, guys, it's not, the title company, although they prepared them, the ultimate responsibility falls upon the principal broker. D. Okay. Okay. Now, if he finds or she finds an error when that actually those settlements they were trying to deliver to the broker, then they got to go back and unravel some things and make sure some things are done correctly. But a lot of brokers, problem is this, okay? We have some things that changed in our state a few years ago where a broker can have as many agents as they want. Used to be if they had a number of different branch brokerages and sales offices, there had to be a sales manager that was a branch manager with a broker's license, and that would kind of supervise these things. But you can imagine, a big brokerage can easily have 20, 30 closings a month. Sometimes more. I mean, yeah, 300 agents. You're going to be having a lot of closings. And generally, you're not going to get this paperwork until after it closes, not before. But they do review them, and sometimes they hire staff. But the broker is responsible. So if there's a mistake, uh, that. But title companies don't make very many mistakes. They know that if they screwed up, um, and the broker got dinged a couple of grand one way or another, uh, they probably won't get any more business from that broker. And so they're very careful about how they go about things. Okay, next question, please. A broker passes away in an accident. Very sad. And the brokerage appointed a new broker 20 days later. What is true? They can only appoint an active principal broker. They can appoint the broker at the right amount of time. In the right amount of time. The division of real estate may have already inactivated the brokerage after 14 days. The brokerage was dissolved immediately when the broker died. Now, does that make sense to you? I mean, if you have a brokerage, you have 25 agents in it, or 30, or 130, whatever it is, and the broker is in a horrible accident and they don't make it, what we're trying to do is serve the public. So you have all these transactions under contract, and they need to close, and someone needs to step in, and so what can they do here? And survey says, give us our answer, please. The division of real estate may already have inactivated the brokerage after 14 days. Now, the division doesn't track, what if this guy died in an automobile accident in California? I mean, that's not necessarily going to hit news here in Utah, or maybe it would. I don't know, but um, I don't know how the division's going to know within 2 weeks that someone actually died unless you let them know, which you're supposed to. But by then, you probably already have another broker. Now, well, we've got some more questions on that in just a moment. Yeah, we'll see if those come up. A lot of times agents ask me, "Well, Rick, what was your situation?" Well, my situation was I was first licensed in Colorado. Now, the laws have changed. I mean, I was going back to ancient history in the late 70s, okay? But back then, you had to be an agent for a while and prove performance, and then you could become a broker. But now in Colorado, everyone starts out as a broker. But but here in Utah, it's kind of like it was when I started in Colorado, where you get a license as an agent, and then you have to earn enough points and have 3 years experience before you can test to become a broker. Now, I get asked all the time, well, do you think it's worth it, for me to get a broker's license? And I said, absolutely. First of all, you get to go through the class again, 120-hour class. It's a little different class. It's a little bit more in depth. And of course, we do focus quite a bit of time at the Institute of Real Estate Education and how to do settlement statements, because that's going to be one of your responsibilities as a new broker. But even as a sales agent, you should understand all these things, and you should understand them as quickly as you can, because you can find mistakes as well. Unfortunately, a lot of agents just go to a closing, sit there eating a cookie, and they don't even know what's going on. And these could be great agents, but because they gave great service. Remember, good salesmanship is all about service, and that's great. But I suggest you get a broker's license as quickly as you can. Now, we could use the extra tuition here at the school, but that's not the reason why. The reason why is because if you're in a brokerage, okay, and a broker passes away, they got 120 agents, whatever it is, okay? The first thing they're going to do is look down the roster and see who's in our company right now that has a broker's license. They would be an associate broker, okay, which means you're the same status as a salesman, except that you have a what? Broker's license. So I recommend you get a broker's license as quickly as you can, because you don't know what opportunities you're going to be confronted with. You may want to be the broker someday, have your own brokerage, or you might be in a position where you take over the brokerage that you're currently working for, even if you come in as a temporary stand-in. Being a broker, with a successful firm, it can be lucrative, and in many cases is. But even so, I mean, it's not unusual, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 grand a year, perhaps. And particularly if they needed someone to step in, because, trying to replace a broker real quickly, because you're having 14 days, you're going to get closed down. What do you think your agents are going to do? They're going to go to other companies, because, they can't be unemployed. I mean, they need to be out getting listings and working with buyers and getting sales put together on a regular basis. So having a broker's license, they go down the roster and there's you and one other person. The other person doesn't want to do it. And you figure, say, well, I'll step in for a bit. It's going to cost you this much money, not to take advantage of anyone, but you'll be responsible too. So that's interesting. And I suggest, Dan suggests, get a broker's license as quickly as you can. Okay. Then you don't have to worry about it. You're ready to go. I mean, it's a 120-hour course, folks. It's not going to happen overnight. So the best time to get your broker's license is quickly as you can qualify for it, and there's no need for it yet. I mean, what if you had a builder you were working with, and you picked up a nice builder and you did some good work, and he says, I'm really going to hit it this year. I'm going to do 50 homes. In the past I usually do 15 to 20. I'm really ratcheting up, and I've got some land that I've developed. I've got the lots coming ready, and I'm going to go for it and I want you to help me. I want you to be my broker. Well, would that be a good time to start your own company? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. It really depends on what your situation is with your current broker, but you would have an option, wouldn't you? So get your broker's license as soon as you can, because you can only do 8 hours a day, and 120 hours is going to take you a little bit of time to get that done. So, and then of course you got to take the test again. but you already did that if you already have an associate broker's license. Broker's license, you're using an associate broker. Next question, please. Compared to a sales agent, an associate broker has more authority, has less authority, has the same authority, has no authority. Okay. Well, you're working for a broker who has the ultimate authority, the broker. But what's the difference between a normal sales agent and a sales agent that's called an associate broker? Well, as I indicated a few moments ago, the associate broker is someone who has a broker's license, but is not the principal broker or a branch broker. They're just an associate broker. I mean, hey, not only that, but you could put on your card that you're a broker, associate broker. You know, if you're competing for a listing, you might say, well, hey, don't list with that guy. He's just a sales agent. I'm a broker. Okay, yeah, well, whatever. But does it give you more authority, less authority, has the same authority, has no authority? Well, survey says, highlight please. Drum roll, has the same authority, right? You both work under the authority of the broker, of course. But just because you have a broker's license doesn't mean you're, any more of a hotshot. A lot of people don't want to be a broker. They're just happy selling, and they're selling, 60 homes a year, and they're just, or 160 a year or whatever. And why would I want to be a broker? And take all that responsibility and everything else. Um, well, I don't know. There's a lot of different reasons why it might be good, like I just mentioned earlier. Next question, please. If an agent's broker has their broker's license suspended, what must the agent do to continue practicing real estate? Ugh. Well, wait a minute. If the agent's broker has their broker's license suspended, what must the agent do to continue selling real estate? Well, you don't have a broker. I mean, you must be attached by the umbilical cord to a broker at all times if you just have a sales agent. Now, if you had an associate broker's license, you could start your own company. But you don't have that option if you're what? A sales agent. So do you have 30 days? A, B, they must get their broker's license. Well, that's going to take a bit. They can never again practice real estate. They must activate their license with an active broker. Hey, which one of these sounds best to you? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of leaning towards, which one?
D.
Says, here we go. They must activate with an active broker. You have to have a broker. Now, that could be you if you're an associate broker and become a principal broker of your own firm. But if you're a sales agent, you got to go find a broker. And it won't be hard to do, but there's other complications of this, of course. You're going to find out real quickly that all listings belong to the broker. This broker can't operate any longer. So you would have to go back to your sellers or your buyers if you're doing buyer brokerage. Uh, and you're going to have to say, well, that broker went kaput, but I'm with this better company now, and I need you to re-up and sign new documents. Okay. Now, if you're giving them great service, they're going to say, "Oh my, that's unfortunate. What happened?" Well, it wasn't me, and it wasn't anybody on my team or whatever, but we had some issues, and they ended up having their license suspended. But I'm with a different company now, and so I need you to work with me, if you will, in that the same capacity I'm working now, but with a different company, and you get them to sign new agreements, because all those agreements are canceled. Now, if things are under contract, um, then you can work on getting those completed. But it gets dicey, so just activate with an active broker, and I'm talking about things that are not under contract yet, but to get them back up on the market. Next question, please. A client wants to collect interest on the money they give to their broker as earnest money for a transaction. Is that possible? And if it is possible, what must they do? A, the interest earned on the earnest money goes to the winning party in a contract dispute. Okay, well, we'll think about that. They cannot collect interest on the money unless they have a written permission from the clients on both sides of the transaction. Trust accounts are not allowed to accrue interest. That's not true. They must have a meeting of the minds with the other party and settle it with a handshake. Yeah, right, right. You heard about the statute of frauds. Handshakes don't work in real estate. They just don't. So, of these, which do you think is best, my friends? Well, let me see. Is it A? Is it B, C, or D? Survey says it is B. They cannot collect interest on the money unless they have written permission from the clients on both sides of the transaction. And that would be buyers and sellers, wouldn't it? Right? So we have some fine print in some of our contracts, in some we don't. But the listing contract for the seller, could have a paragraph in there that said that, okay, we're going to collect interest. Look, think this through for a minute. You're working for a mid-sized company, a couple of hundred agents, maybe, I don't know, or a huge company, 300 or 400 agents, 500 agents. How big is that trust account going to be? Now trust accounts normally are non-interest bearing accounts. But if the buyer and the seller agree that it's okay, um, then they can bear interest. They can collect interest. Now, it gets dicey to say, well, then, well, who do I get the interest, Mister? I'm the buyer. It's my money until we actually close. I want the interest. Seller says, no, I took my property off the market, and heck, I would just soon have had cash and close in 2 days. But they want 45 days to get their loan put together or whatever. So, I don't, I want the interest, consider it kind of like an option to take it off the market. So they have their arguments. So what we normally do is we have um, a nonprofit organization that we can get into in another time, but we have a nonprofit organization that the interest is given to them and it supports different home ownership type programs. And so it's not going to you, the broker, it's not going to you, the sales agent, it's going to this nonprofit, and we can get the buyers, as long as the buyers and sellers agree to it, you know. But don't think earnest money's a $400 or $500 unless you've got hundreds of them, but think of earnest money's a 30, 40, 50 grand, particularly on larger commercial transactions. It's, I mean, your bankers really should love you if you've got a couple $1 million or more in your trust account and they're not paying interest for that money because they're going to lend it out about 4 times fractional interest. Let's look at the next question, please. Okay, on this question, L is a principal broker licensed in several states. Cool, happens. They maintain a single trust account in their home state of California and deposit all earnest money for transactions into the same account for transactions in California, Utah, and Nevada. This practice is improper because every one of these states wants you to keep the money in their state. Okay. So every state has to have their own trust account. A broker cannot be licensed in more than one state. Of course, they can be licensed in more than one state. Why? Why not? Now, a real estate broker's license is not like a driver's license. You have a driver's license, you can hop in your car and go from one end of the country to the other and drive through 10, 15 states, and you're legal to drive in every one of those states. We don't have reciprocity like that in real estate licensing. If you want to sell in California, great, get a California license. But now you want to add Utah and Nevada as well. You got to be licensed in those states as well. You know, and meet all their requirements, which are a little bit the same and a little bit different. Okay. So what do you think? Okay. Utah requires that earnest money be kept in Utah-based trust account. Earnest money cannot be mingled between clients. Okay. Survey says the answer is Utah requires earnest money to be kept in Utah. Right? Right. And California and Nevada are very similar. Okay. They keep the money local. Why? If there's a dispute on that earnest money and you're going to end up in court over it, we don't go to a federal court. We go to a state court, which has jurisdiction over all state licensees and requirements, rules, regulations, and laws that we have to abide by. Okay. I mean, if you're selling real estate in Utah, you don't need to worry about California law. Okay. But a lot of people that buy property in Utah, or that your clients, or live in California and own property here, and now want to sell it, might be in another state. They're more familiar with those laws. Utah law is a little different than California and Nevada law, and a lot the same, so but there are definitely differences. Okay. Okay. Let's look at the next question, please. A Utah broker must have a trust account established in Utah. Yes or no? What do you think? If the broker resides in Utah, I don't care where you reside. I guess you could be an out of state owner. If the broker does not reside in Utah, if the broker has an office in Utah, whether or not the broker resides in Utah or what, you must always, if you're going to be a Utah principal broker, you must always have a trust account. Okay. Survey says whether or not you reside in Utah, you got to have a trust account. Now, they think, well, that's kind of far fetched. Not really. You might live in Mesquite, Nevada, but be a Utah broker. I know several brokers in St. George that have Nevada licenses, and I know some of them are living in Nevada and have Utah licenses and have operations in Utah. Okay. So, you might think it's just border towns, but not necessarily. Okay. Next question, please. B's a builder. Okay. Busy bee builder. Okay. They take a deposit from R, that could be me, to build a home. If B wants to use the money from the deposit to purchase construction materials and pay works, what must they need? Well, they can always use money deposits on construction, or B, written permission from R's broker, written permission, C, written permission from R. Now, who's R again, guys? It's the buyer, okay? Written permission from R sounds really good. Written permission from R's broker, I mean, it's not the broker's money. Deposits for building projects can never be used for actual construction. Yeah. Okay, so survey says, what do you think, guys? Ladies and gentlemen? Yeah. Whose money was it? R. Well, you're going to put it in a trust account. Okay, fine. But if it is a build job, okay, all big builders that I know have their own contracts put together by their own lawyers. You go to Renless Homes, Ivory Homes, these Richmond, I mean, all these companies have their own contract. Now we do have a Rep C contract, real estate purchase contract for new construction. But you got a builder that builds custom homes, or they only build a dozen homes a year or whatever. They're still going to have their own contract. Why? Because the state form doesn't favor the builder as much as they'd like to be favored. Okay. And so where you get this written permission from the buyer that you can use the money they gave you for earnest money to actually buy materials to buy that, to work on the house, it's going to be in the contract, right? And that's where the written permission will come. Now, these contracts, they could be 3-4 pages. Most of the Rep C contracts in our state are 6 pages minimum and sometimes bigger, but if you have a lot of addendums. But in the fine print, it's in there. Now, that kind of means that you need to be very familiar with forms. Okay. So, like I mentioned earlier, we have our state approved forms that you should definitely study those and understand them, because you have to explain them to the buyers and sellers. Now, when you go to work with the builder, their contracts might be a little more different, and they're definitely going to favor the builder more than our state forms do. So, if you're going to be selling a lot of Ivory Homes, Richmond or whoever, you probably ought to get a copy of their contract and be familiar with it so you can explain it to your clients. That's my 2 cents worth. Let's look at the next question. I love working with builders. I built my career on working with builders when I first started. When I first started, I did 53 or 54 transactions my first year, and I did about 98 my second year. And my first year, I had one builder, then got another builder. And then towards the end of the year, I got a third builder. So rolling into that next year is how I got up to almost 100 transactions my second year into business. But even 53 was great, So I made Rookie of the Year, which was cool. But on the other hand, I'm more proud of the fact that I've developed 8 other Rookie of the Years, so showing them how, passing a test is one thing, and we will get you through the exam, okay? But the real test is, are you going to make it into business, okay? And we have help there too. Just so don't forget us. Get a hold of us. We're happy to help you any way we can. We're always here for you. Okay, you shouldn't be calling us during the exam itself. Step out. Can I step out for a minute? I need to make a quick call. No, they're not going to let you do that. Jay's buying a home and they want to give a promissory note as earnest money. Who should they make the note out to? Well, the seller, the buyer, the agent, or the broker. Now, the broker and the agent, the broker, they could put it in their trust, they could put cash or a check in their trust account, but what are they going to do with a promissory note? Well, it's coming from the buyer. That only leaves the seller. Okay, so who should they make the note out to? Should be made out to the seller, who agreed to take the dumb note in the first place. The seller did. Now, a promissory note says, look, I don't have any money, but I'll give you this promissory note promising to pay. And when I default, then I'll be real happy to give you the $10,000. Yeah, right. Okay. No, I mean, but who agreed to take it? You had a seller who was very desperate. They needed a buyer, even if they weren't the best buyer they could get. And the guy isn't going to put up any earnest money, but they're going to give a promissory note. And there's a good reason for it. Maybe they've got everything tied up in something, or maybe they've got a closing, or maybe the market's down a little bit and they don't want to cash out of those stocks until it, kind of rebounds a little bit. A lot of different reasons why that could happen, but you're going to have to, your seller's going to have to be very comfortable with the fact that a promissory note's only as good as the promise from the individual that gave it. And if they're trustworthy and good, that's one thing. But if they default, will they own up and lose the 5,000, 2,000, 3,000, 10,000? I don't know. So as a general rule, you need to, when you sign on with a broker, assuming that you're not going to be the broker, you're not here in the broker's class, but if you're going to sign on, as a agent, your broker, a lot of times brokers have in their employment agreement or their policy and procedures manual prohibitions on how earnest money can be taken. I mean, they don't want cash. They don't want you taking cash. They don't want you getting the title to an antique automobile, or weird science earnest money. And they don't like promissory notes. But I mean, it really depends. So if it's a vacant lot and it's a very established builder and they're just a little short on cash right now, but they want lots in front of them so that when they're done with these projects they can jump right on to the next one. There are a lot of reasons why, and they're established with a good reputation. Maybe a note would be fine. A one-off buyer, I don't know. So but these are things that your broker will weigh in on, and that's where you need to get your advice. Okay. Next question, please. Yep, the seller. Note's going to be made after the seller. In order to distribute earnest money, a broker must have written permission from the buyer. Well, well, why? Well, it was their money, and they're if it's just a closing, then that permission really is in the fact that they signed all the settlement statements, came in with the rest of the down payment, bought the house. Oral permission, hey, come on, man, it's a statute of frauds. In real estate, everything's got to be put in writing. Now, I know there's some things like maybe a lease for less than a year, it doesn't have to be in writing, but you're an idiot if you do that, because as a landlord, your best protection against an erring tenant is a very strong worded agreement. Oral permission from the seller, written permission from both the buyer and seller. Okay, a broker can distribute earnest money on their own discretion. That all depends, okay? But for this question, what do you think the answer is? Survey says, show us the answer, please. And it is written permission from both parties.
Hey, Rick,
Yes.
question, where does the money get distributed to?
Well, it depends on what the contract says. if it's a successful closing in the contract that they sign when they're buying the house, it's part of your down payment. And so that money would be given to the title company, which is the one that is um, actually doing the transaction in some cases. But in most cases, if the earnest money is held by the brokerage, um, so the money was in the broker's trust account, then what happens when that transaction actually closes? Miraculously, it changes from buyer's earnest money that belonged to the buyer to part of the settlement agreement. It goes to against the purchase price. But what happens really is that money comes out of the title company if it is less than the total commission. Now, for example, let's say you had a transaction, it was a $10,000 commission, okay? And the buyer put up $5,000 earnest money. Okay. So the broker who's doing this transaction puts the $5,000 earnest money in their trust account, okay? If the money is in their trust account, the title company that's handling the settlement of this transaction doesn't want that broker to bring them a check for $5,000. Because, okay, what they will do is they say, well, you're owed a $10,000 commission. Keep the five you already have, and here's another five to make up the difference for the $10,000. Okay. Now, so what happens is miraculously, and that money morphs from buyer's money to whose? Broker's money. And it's all handled on the settlement sheets. So what happens is that money better dang well get out of that trust account, because a broker is limited on how much money they can put in their trust account. So if you had a closing and that money's set in your trust account for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and you get audited by the division, they're going to fine you, because they're going to say, wait a minute, you had too much money of yours in the trust account. What do you mean? I just had $500 in there, or $1,000. No, 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 no. No, you had $7,000 in there. You had $6,000 in there because you had a $5,000 commission that you didn't take out of the trust account. It was deposit and then morphed into broker's money. Usually they're going to pull it out, because most brokerages are very generous commissions. And so, the broker keeps a little bit and the agent gets most of it. So depending on where you work for, I mean, you might be on an 80-20 split. So at a $10,000 commission, you got $8,000, your broker kept $2. Well, it was a $5,000 deposit. Three of that is going to be yours, but you're going to just get one check. That it's all handled in a closing. Okay. Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for asking. Okay. Next question, please. It's so exciting. I love to talk about closings because the buyer gets what they want, seller gets what they want, and we get what we want. It's a happy day, okay? Most of the time. Sometimes, you have situations where the buyers are underwater. We'll probably see those again. We saw a lot of those back in, 78, 79, 80, 83, all in there, where people, property prices fell, and they're falling now, a little bit, particularly in commercial. But that's okay. You might have to go to the bank. Sometimes they're over leveraged on the property. You might even have to talk the bank into a short sale. A short sale is where you're not even getting enough money out of the transaction, because maybe they had let's just take easy numbers. They had a $200,000 loan on this condo, and when they bought it, it was 225. They put down 25 grand. They got in a condo, got $200,000 loan, and now it's a few years later, but the condo market has died. And so maybe okay, and so they sold it for 200 grand. Well, but that's not even enough money after you pay all the expenses, and including our commission. Okay, and so what happens is you have to talk the bank into taking less money than what they're owed. It's called a short sale. They're not getting even enough money out of the sale to pay off their loan. And I did 150 of those back in the bad days. People called it the bad days. It was the wonderful days for an agent. I mean, people, yeah, but I even got many of my sellers some walkaway money, you know, the bank started getting smart, and they said, well, we got to pay a commission because we want these dang things sold. And secondly, if we give the sellers some cash for keys, they don't tear up the house. They don't dismantle a furnace and take it with them. What are they going to do if they use furnace? They're going to haul it around from house to house or whatever for a couple of years, or maybe apartment to apartment, or stick it in a storage garage and then sell it for $35. I mean, it's just crazy. But people do crazy things when they get under a lot of distress. But generally speaking, we, short sales, the banks realize two things. Number one, we got to pay the realtors or they're not going to get sold. And number, like we want them to, and we're competing, And number two, well, if you don't give the seller a couple of bucks to even get out of the house, I mean, a lot of them don't even have money to rent a U-Haul, So then, it can get dicey. Okay. But these are all practical things that you'll learn. So, but tonight we're working on these questions, but thank you for being here. You chime in. It's a great time to get in the market, folks. People really need you now, and they need hard-hitting, authentic, hardworking agents, have the service ethic I keep pounding on tonight, because they've got to get this sucker sold. They need to move on with their life. Next question, please. Wait a minute, back up. Okay, an owner of a brokerage opened a new branch in a neighboring city and hired T to be the branch broker. Now, P must also what? Register the branch with the Division of Real Estate. Now, you could have like a model home, maybe if you're going to be there more than a year. The division wants you to register that perhaps as a branch office. It really, you can go and negotiate, but generally their cutoff is 12 months. If you're going to be having agents that rotate through that model home, then that might be a different situation. That would be one of your negotiating things. I mean, we decorated this model home to the nines. I mean, we've got beautiful wallpaper and upgraded this and that and whatnot. And we let people know these are upgrades, not the standard house. But but if you've got agents that they report to that open house, that's where they're working out of every day. They don't even have an office at the main office. Okay, then that's looking a whole lot like a branch office, particularly if it's going to be there more than 12 months. And so they would have to register the branch as a branch office with the real estate division. 12 months is kind of the cutoff. But there can be some negotiation on that, but it's 12 months for the
I,
test.
I have a question
Yes, ma'am.
with that. So the Division of Real Estate is more for properties and stuff, and then the Association of Realtors is with
Okay.
agents.
Very good question. The Division of Real Estate is our regulatory authority in the state of Utah. Okay, they are state office. They are state employees, and they enforce rules and regulations. And then they have, to help them, they have 5 people that serve on a real estate commission. And those people are all licensed agents. Usually they're all brokers. They don't have to be, but they usually are. And that's the regulatory agency. Now, the Association of Realtors, that's our private club. Okay. You join the Association of Realtors so you can become a member, not only of the association, but of the multiple listing service. I mean, one of the fantastic things about our business is that we cooperate with each other. I mean, yeah, you'd rather sell it yourself or maybe someone in your office, it'd be kind of cool. The broker likes it if it's an in-house sale, if both the listing and for the buyer and the seller are in-house with their 2 different agents or with the same agent. I love it when I sell my own listings. Checks go twice as far. I can get caught up in the shower. So how are we doing on the Millers? Oh, just fine. Just talking to myself. But a lot of times their property is sold through the multiple listing service. And, because we all have access, we have, if you've ever been out looking at houses with an agent, you notice there's usually a key box on the house. we have access to get into the home, and it just makes for very cooperative. So on the one hand, we are vicious competitors, but on the other hand, we are great cooperators as well because we're trying to get our property sold. And a lot of times, if it's sold in your same office, maybe there's a bonus a little bit, or sometimes there's not. It just really depends on how the commissions are set up. Usually brokers are so generous in Utah, they don't have much money to give away, but we cooperate with each other, and we even have there's several companies now in town that are doing property tours, and they're inviting agents from all different offices. They even bring in lunch. So these are usually done on Tuesdays. That's a good day for sales meetings and also property tours. But I go to property tours at one company and sometimes another company, because I'm a very small brokerage. But that they're fine. They're happy. I can, and it's property tours are great ways to show your seller that you are mobilizing the entire real estate market to get their house sold. And I really like these property tours that we're doing now with some offices that are promoting them, because uh, when the agents come through, as a courtesy, you should always leave a card, and a business card. So, they're flipping through the cards when the owners come home. They flip through the cards and they see a lot of different companies. It's just evidence that you have mobilized the entire real estate community to get their house sold. Okay. It's funny business. We love cooperating. Now think about car sales. So you go into the Hyundai dealer. Do you think they're going to say, well, we have this and that, but the other Hyundai dealer down there in Provo, he's got this and that, and I can take you down there and show you those. That doesn't happen. Okay. So we're vicious competitors and we're vicious cooperators as well. Okay.
Perfect.
Hey, what if there's an agent that's spending $3,000 or $4,000 a month on radio or TV advertising? They're a real hot dog. They got they're doing well. They got a $3,000 budget to be on the radio, and so you're there trying to get a listing, and you're not on the radio, and they say, well, we hear this other agent on the KSL all the time, and we're thinking about talking to them about selling a home. Oh, great, yeah, I like him. Look, in fact, look at this. And you hand them a list of agents. This is my favorite agent list. And before my head hits the pillow tonight, when you list with me, I'm going to go ahead and call every one of these agents or send them a text or an email or whatever, telling them I just got this house and up for sale, and it won't hit the MLS for probably a day or two. But I'm giving them a heads up because I like working with them and they like working with me. Guess who's on that list? The $3,000 a month advertiser. Now, do you think people want to talk to 4 or 5 agents or even 2? They're busy lives. I mean, honey, we really ought to, let's pick an agent and let's go with them. And, well, yeah, but what about this guy? Advertises on the radio. Well, you show them your list of favorite agents and you do what you say. You give them a heads up that this will be put on the MLS tomorrow, but they could have a buyer ready to go tonight, or tomorrow, when they get there. So it's one way to neutralize a competitor that's doing $3,000 a month when you're going to solicit their cooperation. Make sense? Or would you rather spend $3,000 a month trying to compete with their advertising? I don't know. You could do either if you have the money.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Next question, please. There's a lot
That's
of
the last one, Rick.
that was the last one.
No, this is.
This is okay. I was having so much fun. A broker sets up a temporary branch office in a model home. Okay. They do not need to register with the division unless the branch office is going to be there more than, we already discussed this. Is it 18? Is it 1? Is it 6? Or is it 12? Okay. Obviously, by the tone of my voice, guess what? Survey says it's 12 months. Okay. You're going to pass this exam. if you work on test questions, going into the exam, now you need to go to the classes because that's where you learn the basic material. But where you really hammer it into your head is by working with test questions. And we have hundreds and hundreds of test questions for you to work with. And we even have some special test questions that are surprisingly similar to what exactly you're going to see. So you came to the right school. Look, if you're in another state, we appreciate you watching our videos on YouTube and several other places, but you know, we're happy to answer your questions too, particularly on the national material. Just give me a call. My cell phone is 801-556-8000. That's 556-8000. Operators are standing by. That's me. But happy to help. I don't want you. I've got a student that's taking the test tomorrow, Tuesday. This is a Monday. They're taking a test on Tuesday, and she's a little confused on a couple of things. Well, do I want her flipping through our handbook? Do I want her, watching 6 videos trying to find the answer to questions, or do I want her to pick up the phone and call 801-556-8000, and we spend a quality 3 minutes on the phone and she gets the answers and the confusion dealt with?
Yeah.
No charge. I mean, just give me a call. Okay. And you can call the office too, because I'm not the only person in our company that's willing to do that. And Dan, we have the best school in the state. We have the highest passing rate in the state. And we're here to help you. Okay.
I have a question with the points.
Oh, the points. Okay.
So, because usually I don't know what the question was, but I know it's like 60 points for the broker something.
Yeah, well, you got to get points, and there's a schedule on this, and you need to be familiar with that schedule because there are test questions. Okay, you get
So,
so many points for a piece of it, so many points for a lot, so many points for a house, so many points for a lease. Okay,
okay.
so you need to have a reasonable understanding of what points you get for what, and it could be a combination of things. Let's say you're working on a team, or maybe you have just 2 of you that are working together. Well, you get half the points. You share them with the other person. But that's a schedule. It's all right in our manual. Okay, and we do talk about it when we do that class, when we talk about qualifying to get a broker's license. So just be familiar with that. Okay.
Okay. And then I
Go
need
ahead.
help with the leasehold estate and the life estate.
A life estate is something that you'll see on the exam, but thousands and thousands of transactions, guys, over the last, what is it? I don't know, what is it, 45 years, Dan? 46 years. Thousands of transactions I've done. I've never seen a life estate, but it's on the test. Okay. A life estate is an old type of program that is available in Utah, and it will be on your test. There'll be a couple of questions, pure atre v, based on the life of another. There's about 3 or 4 questions that they have in the database, and you might see 1 or 2 of those. But a life estate is a situation where it is ownership, but it's ownership of a life estate, which means it will expire at some time when someone dies. Um, let's say mom is living with you, and you buy a house together, and but you make it a life estate, and well, it's probably not the best example. A better example is you have a daughter that's kind of a spendthrift. I got a couple of those, but it's so I want her to have a place to live, so I help her get into a condo. I help her buy it. I put up the money, whatever. I try to get her on the loan so that she can start building stronger credit and whatnot. But if she's an owner, then she can do what she wants with it, right? Something foolish like trade it for a down payment on a Porsche, or whatever. You can't, So a life estate is ownership, but it's ownership with strings attached. An older gentleman, his mom dies, and he kind of falls in love with this much younger lady, and so they go out and buy a new mansion, and the family's a little upset because they figure she's just, hungry for his money. Well, maybe he doesn't put her in as a fee owner, with with fee ownership, with absolute ownership. Maybe it's a life estate. So she gets to live in the house. It's her house. Maybe it's their house, but however they want to set that up. But when someone dies, like her or him, if he dies and then she's left with the life estate, then when she dies, it goes back to his estate, or it goes to a remainder man, you know. But people with money don't do life estates. They just don't do them anymore. It's an old antiquated thing. You'll see it on a real estate exam, but in real life, probably never see one. You might, but I doubt it. What they do are trust. They do trust. Okay. Because now I can put that condo in a trust, and I put the trustee who handles the trust with someone that thinks just like me, like my lawyer. you know, you know. And so, she goes with my lawyer and she says, "Look, I want to sell the condo and buy a Porsche." And he says, "Well, honey, I don't think your dad would like that, And since I'm the trustee of this of the trust, no. Let's go down and get you one of those nice little Volkswagens. They're really nice, and you can have one of those. Okay. So, it's 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 ownership with strings attached. But smart people don't do them because they don't work that well and they're not that well understood. And a trust is so much better, because, well, your lawyer helps make the decision. Okay.
Okay, and then the leasehold estate.
Leasehold estate is simple. You're a renter. Okay. Do you own the property because you're renting it? No. So what do we call it when you're there? You have a leasehold estate. Okay. Well, what does it say? Well, what's the lease say? Now, uh, if you're foolish, you do verbal leases. But, if you're smart, you always do written leases. Why? Because it defines the leasehold estate. If I mean, like numbers of occupants, for example. I mean, I had a buddy of mine. He's a broker in Boise, Idaho, and this guy came in, wanted to rent this nice house, very, clean cut young man, had a suit on, whatever else, looked like a LDS returned missionary, even had holes, where the name badge was. And so he leased the house to him and then drove by about a week later, and it was a local motorcycle gang. They drew straws. And the guy with the short straw had to get a haircut, and they got him a used suit at DI. And he leased the house. And as he's driving by, some guy's thrown through the front window. It took him about 5 weeks to get the people out. They destroyed the house. So anyway, they had a lot of parties there. Party. But don't do it in my house. And I think that his client we was doing property management for was not a very happy camper. Okay, well, real estate can be fun too. Yeah, but that kind of fun you don't need. Any other questions? You have great questions. Thank you so much. You have a very sharp mind. You're going to be great.
Oh.
You're going to be great. Okay.
I think I will just be fine, but just
Well,
these big words.
it's the service. Salesmanship is service, and you're digging into it. You're gonna be. Hey, about 1980, I got into business 78. 1980, I had a client ask me a question, and I didn't know the answer. I mean, I knew it was something I studied in real estate school, but I forgot. I mean, once you take the test, you kind of walk out of there. If you're walking to your car after the test, you start forgetting. Within a few weeks, you've forgotten more, and after a couple of years, because you really don't use everything, And so anyway, so I decided if I wanted to own this information, and this is something I suggest you do. Okay, now listen up. You teach these classes.
Okay.
Okay. We're always looking for good instructors. You have a great personality, and get into business, get a little bit of experience, and then come back and talk to Dan at the school. And I mean, after a year or so, it depends on how many transactions you've done and a few things, but if you really want to own this information, you need to teach it, because once you get excellent questions like yours, and you get put on the spot a lot, then you know it. Okay.
Okay, and
So
then
put it in the
last
back of your mind.
question.
And Dan pays fabulously, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right, Dan? No? Okay.
The really good ones.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Other questions?
The convenant clause.
The what clause?
Convenant. Convenant or
Conveyance?
conveyance. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. It just tells how it's going to be transferred. It says if it's a personal property, what do we use?
If it's
Put
a
you on
real
the spot now. Bill of sale. Bill of sale. Okay. If it's real estate, what do we use? The deed.
a deed.
Right. And so it just defines how it's being transferred. Okay. Okay.
Alrighty, I think that's
Thanks.
it.
Thank you so much for being here. You got my number. Call if I can help. Happy to help.
Awesome, thank you.
And we have lots of materials you can get at the school. A lot more questions if if as you get through the classes and you're preparing for the exam, don't pull up the manual and start rereading it. The best cramming for the exam will be done with similar multiple choice questions. And we have them electronically, and we also through a Quizlet program that I provide to students at no charge, and we also have a lot of printed ones you can print off, or put in your phone and kind of watch it, and whatever.
Yeah, I called you this morning, so I got the Quizlet.
Oh, that was you?
Yep, that was me.
Okay. Yeah. And how did it go?
It's going pretty good.
You had a question,
great.
you got it answered. It was like a 3-minute phone call, and you didn't have to worry about it anymore, right?
Yes, yep,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
right.
All right. Thanks for calling.
Thank
Don't be
you.
a stranger. Thanks, Dan. Thanks to all our viewers tonight and those that are watching on this as a pre-recorded type of thing. And we care. We want you to pass the test. We do not want you to screw up our passing stats. We like being number one. Okay, so see you around. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. You are taking the right steps to get started on your real estate career, and we're proud of you. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single one of our videos, go ahead and subscribe to our channel right now. And if you want to show our instructors that you appreciate them, give them a virtual high five. Click that like button. If you want to join us for our Prep My Exam reviews that include all the tools you'll need to get started in real estate on the right foot, go ahead and click the link in the description, and we'll see you there.